Well, there's a chance you didn't like this movie, or maybe you just liked it and didn't love it. Or maybe you liked it so much you thought it was incredible. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. With She-Hulk now airing, I wanted to first stop and talk about the only other Hulk-centered MCU project so far, The Incredible Hulk. So before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie are if you already saw it or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like MCU reviews on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about The Incredible Hulk. This stars Edward Norton as Bruce Banner, a scientist on the run from the US government, who must find a cure for the monster he turns into whenever he loses his temper. This is directed by Louis Leterrier, and this is often regarded as the black sheep of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, generally, when you hear people talk about the MCU, it's almost like this movie doesn't exist to them, whether they choose to pretend it doesn't exist or they forget about it altogether. And to be honest, I can kinda see why. This is only the second film in the MCU, and it was out the same year as the much more critically acclaimed Iron Man, which kicked things off, and it was quickly overshadowed a month later by The Dark Knight. It's Edward Norton's only appearance as the Hulk, and tonally, it's the starkest departure from anything else we've ever seen in the MCU. Because the MCU is now well known for its distinct tone and formula, where it's a hero's journey that features a very lighthearted tone and sees characters making all these little quips at one another. And this is the total opposite of that. Now, it's not devoid of fun by any means, but I'd say to date, this is the darkest MCU film out there. Despite how grand in scale the MCU has gotten over the years and how tragic several arcs have been, there's still always been that distinct MCU feel each and every time that reels things back in when it seems like it might get too heavy. This, however, does not do that so much. There's the occasional joke here and there, but it's probably the most consistently serious of any MCU project we've gotten. Now, if you're someone who's over the MCU and who's over that sort of tone, you might actually find yourself gravitating towards this more. It doesn't seem to be the case for those who are diehard MCU fans, as they barely ever discuss this, but I've heard from those who are getting MCU fatigue that they actually don't mind this movie. And while I wouldn't say I'm MCU fatigued, as I generally do enjoy that universe, even though it's far from perfect, I find myself in the camp of enjoying this as well. Now, it's definitely not without its issues, and I wouldn't call it one of the best MCU projects by any means, but it's definitely a solid film. One thing I actually have to commend this movie for is the fact that it actually forgoes dedicating so much time to the superhero origin story, especially when this was at a time when most superhero movies treaded that territory. But this was only 5 years after the Ang Lee film with Eric Bana, and rather than rehash a lot of that same territory, this film instead opts to get us up to speed with everything that's happened to Banner in a montage over the film's opening credits. It's all done really well, actually, as it quickly gets us through the whole origin story in a matter of minutes, telling us succinctly everything we need to know, and it allows us to start sympathizing with these characters immediately without even hearing a word spoken for the first few minutes. And then that way, we're quickly invested in them once we're caught up in present day. It's actually some really great visual storytelling, and it's probably one of the more creative moments within the MCU, to be quite honest, as it really taps into what film looks to accomplish, as it's first and foremost a visual medium. And from there, it thrusts you right into things, so we don't wind up with a 2.5-hour movie, so that was great. And I will say, I liked Edward Norton's take on Banner, playing him as this isolated, tragic figure who spends the entire movie trying to find a cure for being the Hulk, which has been his mission in the first 5 years since the events that we saw over the opening credits. We'll get these text screens that show him keeping track of how long it's been since each time he's become the Hulk, where it'll say it's been this many days without an incident. And we see Norton really tap into someone who's undergoing this huge identity crisis as he finds his whole life having been upended for the past few years. Now, we don't go quite as deep into his psyche as I would have liked to have seen, but Norton really taps into Banner's humanity quite well, and he really gets you to care for the character, which makes up for some of the material that doesn't go quite as deep. And you also have a great supporting cast here. One of my favorites was William Hurt as Thunderbolt Ross, who's the father of Banner's love interest Betty, played by Liv Tyler, and he's also the one who leads the manhunt to find Banner so that he can weaponize the Hulk. And Hurt really does a solid job at capturing the obsession in Ross that makes him a really solid antagonist. Not a villain, but someone whose attempts at protecting his daughter and others is deeply misguided, which makes him a really nuanced and well-written character we just can't root for. But I also really like Tim Roth as Emil Blonsky, who's our actual villain, also known as Abomination. Now, this does fall into a trope that's mostly been associated with MCU villains, where they're essentially just a copy and paste version of the hero in terms of their powers, and it's just that they use those powers for more sinister reasons. Because Blonsky is tasked by Ross with taking down the Hulk, and he gets injected with a serum that also has the gamma radiation that turned Banner into the Hulk. But it still works, as Roth elevates the material with a lot of scene-chewing delivery, chronicling Blonsky's own obsession with taking down the Hulk, which turns into a thirst for more power. The level of commitment you see in him is immediately apparent, as he just takes charge and steals the spotlight every time he's on screen. He might be a bit one-note as a character, but given just how enjoyable Roth is, it makes Blonsky a pretty solid villain, even though there's really not much explored to him. Which is my big criticism of this movie as a whole. Now, it certainly taps into themes of obsession and someone struggling to maintain their identity, the latter of which is a major theme of the Hulk in general, and Norton tries tapping into that as much as he can with his performance, but the film as a whole never quite goes in a direction I'd exactly find too meaningful. I felt like as it goes on, the character study elements take a bit of a back seat. Even though a major part of the film is Banner being determined to maintain full control over his body and rid himself of the Hulk, I felt that duality isn't really explored, especially in later parts of the film. It's a major plot point for sure, but not much is done with it at times beyond Banner just saying he wants this to be over. Like, there's not as much of that internal struggle that's generally an integral part of the character. It's great we got things like those text screens I mentioned saying it's this many days without an incident, as it shows how intently he's watching over his own transformations, but it doesn't take full advantage of that struggle he's going through beyond little visual cues like a facial expression. And sometimes those lack of meaningful moments would be in service of this mainly just being a pretty straightforward action movie that kept things light on character development. Now, don't get me wrong. The fight scenes here are all really solid, and another big reason why I enjoy this. Leterrier does know how to stage action scenes well. His previous movies before this were the first two Transporter movies and Unleashed, and while none of those were exactly incredible movies, for what it's worth, the fight scenes were well done in those films, and his skills as an action movie director are once again apparent here. Sure, it can be pretty CGI heavy at times, and these aren't exactly the most memorable fight scenes in all of the MCU, but they were at least entertaining for what they were. I mean, if you're coming to a Hulk movie just to see him wreak havoc and see him smash a bunch of stuff, you definitely get that here. So if that's all you're here for, you won't be disappointed. And these action scenes do make up for the lack of character depth that I wanted a little more of. It's just, whenever there are moments that require a lot of emotional impact, you care enough because of the actors elevating the material, but it's not like we dig so deep into some of these relationships that it hits us so well. Like, it's fine, and I do care enough about the characters, but it still needed a little more for it to really pull on my heartstrings or anything like that. In particular, a lot of the stuff with Liv Tyler didn't really work for me. Now, she's great in general, and she gives a solid performance here, but I didn't really think there was that much chemistry between her and Norton that these moments exactly resonated with me. And I mean, I get they're not going to spend a ton of time together because Banner's been on the run for a good part of the film, but I just feel like the character's presence wasn't strong enough, on top of that lack of chemistry as I mentioned, to make for Betty and Bruce's reunion to feel satisfying. It just came off as a little corny to me, to be quite honest. Though on a side note, in this storyline, it was cool to see Ty Burrell as Betty's new boyfriend in a much more serious role than we're used to seeing from him, especially as this was right before Modern Family, but it was cool to see him. But regarding the storyline in general, again, I like Liv Tyler, but I just don't think this utilized her the best, and it's a shame because the film sets things up so nicely in the beginning with those opening credits, and it just never fully capitalized on that. It was still an entertaining movie overall, but I don't think it quite reached the heights it could have reached. It's easy to see why not many people discuss The Incredible Hulk anymore, but I actually do like this movie, even if it does have some issues. While it has a great setup, and it does tap into some interesting themes about obsession and struggling with one's identity, the film only scratches the surface of said themes, and mostly plays things out as a fairly straightforward action movie that only has so much depth. But the thing is, it's still not bad because those action scenes are very entertaining, with some solid direction by Louis Leterrier. And the performances were all solid, in particular from Edward Norton, William Hurt, and Tim Roth, that it made us really enjoy these characters, and it compensated for some of the more one-dimensional material. It might not be a great MCU movie, but I still think it's good. The Incredible Hulk gets a 7 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Incredible Hulk, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you actually like Edward Norton's portrayal of the Hulk, and do you want to see more Hulk solo projects? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.